Welcome back to Mental Health Monday. I am Bryon, and that is the lovely Anna. And today we're going to be talking about boundaries, patterns, and survival responses in relationships. All the good things that we're here because we're here to talk to you and you directly on our own experiences as normal humans living in this crazy world, and also just being relatable by just doing what we do and letting you know what we do so that we can better understand each other and ourselves. So, without further ado, the lovely Anna will take it over and give us kind of a little outline of what we're going to be talking about today. Get us started.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. I guess I want to start off to say that we are just basically grazing the surface here. Definitely plan on digging in further into these different topics later on, but just to give an overview and like how some of the integrations and everything may look in all the different relationships in our lives. But today we're going to be building off of what we talked about in previous episodes. So, awareness and survival responses, regulation as support and not control, and really building on that foundation to understand the nervous system and then supporting through regulation and how this may show up in various relationships, which can look different depending upon the relationship, even the person, the time. There's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah, definitely a lot of nuance when it comes to relationships because there is a bunch of different ones that we have in our lives. And, there's work relationships, there's spouse relationships, and then there's friendships, and then there's just everyday dealing with people. Those are relationships as well, just coworkers or just people you see, you meet, talk to. We all have different relationships and different ways we perceive those and deal with those. So that's very important to kind of break down and give you guys a good overall insight into what those relationships tend to tendencies are and what we usually go to when we're reacting to these certain situations. So
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics to discuss because it's so broad and there's so much that we can learn about ourselves and about others. Even if you have very limited interactions with folks, you still have to have interactions with folks. And so and even with yourself too, it's like important to understand and to see what our own patterns are so we can better understand ourselves and then to kind of really observe those around us to see how they present themselves with us on a case by case basis and how we can integrate the two. Because awareness allows us to show up as our best selves, to work on to showing up as our best selves, and then also to interacting with others.
yeah, they brought up a great point that I don't want to kind of skip over or breeze over is the relationship with ourself as well. I think that's very important, especially when we're talking about this type of things and when we're going to be talking about our nervous system, which is totally directed right to us. And as we talked about before, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is our normal body's reaction to any interaction for the most part. So, getting to know how we genuinely react to that is kind of what we're covering today. And it's definitely good to know with relationships and understanding your surroundings, as you say, because you got to understand why you're reacting the way you are to certain situations. And once you kind of learn that about yourself and what your general reaction is, and then you start to look into that and figure out why you're reacting in that way, and that's where that all starts. But you have to self-examine and check out your own relationship with yourself and why you're reacting to certain situations, which is very important. So one thing that we always have when we're in relationships, no matter which kind, as we talked about, there's many to have, is how much you're reacting if you're feeling vulnerable, if you're vulnerable with a certain person, or you're feeling protective. You know, basically the five: freeze, fight, fawn, all the good things that we talk about and that we love, and just why we're reacting to those ways in our situation because our body is telling us to react if we need to fight back or freeze and don't be able to say anything. And then it's just it's a whole lot to take in, but it's also really good for our bodies to know why we're feeling these types of ways and understanding them better so we can get a better response in the future. And that's definitely the biggest takeaway from getting to know that relationship with yourself as you're getting to know yourself around other people. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things, like, so relationships are really a mirror. We talk about healing, and one of the quickest ways and one of the best ways to observe and to work on healing is in relationship with others. And that runs the gamut because folks present themselves and then it gives you, and they show up as a mirror to see, okay, how did I react in this situation with this person? It gives you feedback. You're really working in talking with people, interacting with people. You're on a day to day basis. How we present ourselves is based off of our conditioning and our nervous system. So, like you're saying, vulnerability, emotional exposure, conditioning, perceived risk, our nervous system is really trying to protect us in what we perceive as safe or not safe. And that can be based on, conditioning, past experiences, etc., as well as just ourselves and what we've observed in our day-to-day basis. And so when we interact with folks, we get that feedback and then we can take that in and decide, okay, how are we going to react to this situation? I can't quite remember where I was going with that.
oh, it's okay. I think a good way to put that is just knowing the situation where we get ourselves in and to know how to deal with those in general. So we'll get into the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn reactions to certain situations and where that leads us to and what that might mean for us to have those types of reactions. Because when we say fight, we get defensive. We're trying to control the situation. Definitely, it's the fear. Fear takes over a lot when we fight. I know that from personal experience, just how my neurodivergent brain works is that I want to be understood. So a lot of my times in relationships that I've had, I fight to try to be heard and understood because I always feel as though my ego, which is something that we'll have to definitely dive deep into, of wanting to feel like I'm being portrayed as the person that I am and feeling very challenged. So a lot of the times of what I had to learn is why was I fighting, and to also understand while fighting is a big one is you're basically not listening to the other person by trying to fight for your right to be heard and understood. And then it took me a long time to kind of step back and realize, I have to hear out whoever it is, relationship, work, friends, you got to give those moments and, you know, let them speak and don't automatically get defensive. But that's something definitely that I relate to very hard in situations with a lot of relationships is just becoming defensive, which is definitely a fight out of the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn area of this where my body gets tense and I'm like, no, like you're telling me I'm a bad person. I'm not a bad person. This comes from a good spot. And I fight it and fight it and then realizing I'm just making everything worse. So I'll throw that over to you if you have anything to say on the fight aspect, but we can also talk about flight as well.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing to add with any of these is that they're not definitive, as in this is exactly how you react and this is what this is. Not just, and even within a same situation in an instance, you can have a mix of these different responses. So, like for example, I oftentimes have come from fight and fawn, and my intention, which, even though it's well intended, it may not be the best response all the time, but my intention is to really help to resolve a situation, to come into a middle ground and resolve it as soon as possible. Sometimes that can be pushy. That's
Yeah.
where the fighting part comes
Yep.
in.
Definitely.
That comes across as like as pushy and fighting, but it's really, to want from a good place of wanting to have a compromise. And but still it's like you have to learn that balance there. And then fawn too, really over accommodating sometimes. And on my end, sometimes I over accommodate and just to find that, get to that resolution because I want to save the relationship instead of necessarily looking at it, taking a step back and looking at, okay, am I overstepping my own boundary, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, and am I overextending myself here, whereas we could actually come to a more clear and harmonious middle ground without me overgiving myself in a situation.
Man, do I know that way too well. Yes, I understand. Just wanting things to be okay and kind of giving yourself more over is something I definitely had to deal with in personal relationships many times where I go 90 when they go 10 just to make sure that the path is cut down so that we can keep moving forward. So I totally understand that. I mean, I get into that and then with the flight is just the same thing. Like you just become avoidant and you just try to avoid the situation and get away from it. And like you said, these are all just part of a mixture of anything that you could be feeling, and then you could be feeling all four at the same time. So it's kind of on what you feel, but you got to understand what you're feeling. So we're just trying to give you, grace in the sense that there is ways to look at it and ways to dig deeper into these things while giving you terms for what they would be considered. And when you freeze, definitely have done this many a times, especially when you fight so much that you just freeze and you become unresponsive and you just say yeah whatever or just don't say anything back, and that's definitely like harming the situation as well. And I don't want to get that mixed up with taking time to process, but you have to let whoever you're having this interaction with understand that you being quiet is you trying to think it over or, give it time, and that's something that you have to not just become frozen and be quiet and not say anything back. You have to express that you need time and things like that, which is close to that. But you got to understand there is a little difference that it will give both you and whoever is on the opposite side of you some grace in the sense of being able to deal with the situation that you're dealing with. That's what I found to be one of the most helpful situations in these particular instances is even work to friendship to everything is if there's a situation that's giving you stress or giving you some kind of feelings a lot of the time I just say hey, like the worst boss thing they say is we'll circle back around, we'll get back to that. And that's something that kind of is very important to me as I continue to heal and grow is taking the time to really do diligence on thinking and while I'm going through all these emotions, what I need to make the situation good. And like you said, not to give too much of myself to make the situation just go away, but really give myself time to think about how I need to respond that's going to be best for the whole situation, including myself and not leaving myself out. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one thing that you said there that I really liked is using the reference circle back around. That's so important. And also too, think of it like in that scenario, in like a work scenario too. Oftentimes the other person wants to know, okay, well, if it's a project or something you're working on or something that they oftentimes want to know, okay, about how long do you need? How long do you need? So that way they can oftentimes gauge what they need to do. And so it's as we're learning these things and learning how much time we may need on in a different scenario, it's really important to say, okay, just give me such and such time frame. Just give me, a couple hours. Just give me, till tomorrow. We start to learn what we need in that scenario in order to come back and we can vocalize it to that other person and that builds connection and trust right there. Because then, especially if you're able to just that communication and then actually following through on that communication, as you said, and that starts to build trust. And any conflict, no matter what it is, having that and continuing to work on it, even showing effort. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. But showing that effort and that consistent effort really goes a long way in building that connection and trust, and it strengthens the relationship.
yeah, and strengthening is what helps us all the way around. I think, just being aware of where we are and what we can do better is always going to be something that's going to definitely stick out rather than the negative. I think there's just a good sense of finding out about who you're dealing with and who you are, all in the same thing. Like you said, it always points right back to ourselves, right? Like I feel like, you know. But another thing that we definitely should cover is what we are giving too much of ourselves seems familiar, and that's something that we definitely have to work on as we work on ourselves, is knowing that even familiarity on caving in situations or giving too much of ourselves, which I love that that's how you put it, because that's definitely how it is, that familiarity isn't always the best route. And as much as it might feel safe, it might feel like the right choice because you've been there before, that's where truly learning and growing comes from, is being able to, they say you don't move unless you get feel uncomfortable, and that's why this earth puts you in uncomfortable situations, is so that you grow or move. And I think really that does come true in a lot of situations when dealing with people, because you grow when you start to get away from familiar and start to go in a direction where you need to go to, where you're trying to figure out what's best for you, but also know what's going to be best for the person across from you, no matter what the situation is. We deal with different people at different situations, bosses, yes, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, sort of situations, just to kind of get them to move along. And then once you start to think about things and you can give them a little pushback that will help you in ways, I'm not saying revolt, but there's ways that we can build on what we know their strengths are and what your strengths are, and we can communicate better without it just being such a familiar yes, no, whatever sort of situation. And that goes for relationships across the board. Once you learn about yourself and learn about the person across from you, you can learn to stop going for familiar so much and start to go for what can bring more equality to that relationship that we're having. So I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
touch on that.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned there about getting to learn the other person because, we meet people regularly just in daily interactions. And if you're going to, in each interaction is feedback for us. It's data that we can use to take back and to analyze to see, of course, like the longer interactions provide more data so that can show us more about what any patterns that we may have, how we can, adjust the volume of ourselves depending upon different scenarios, situations. But taking the more that we learn about somebody and learn how they operate, I kind of see it like working at a restaurant and you just meet a new staff member and we learn to work with that person and to flow with that person. Okay, how do they work best? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And over time, that builds a very nice flow so that you can work in oftentimes just quick nonverbal or just quick verbal communication and see, okay, well, that person is having a little issue right here, let me step in and help. So it's the same kind of thing in a day-to-day relationship, is seeing how the other person is and not necessarily adjusting your whole self and your whole personality, but learning to see, okay, where can I show up for them and how can they show up for me, so that way we can adjust and flow. And that ebb and flow may vary at times. We're not always going to come right in the middle. Sometimes we may need a little bit more help here and there, either way.
Yeah, it's good to work with the person, but also work on yourself. I definitely feel that. I think one thing to note is just where it's never going to be easy. It's never going to be right in the middle, which we all try to really like shoot for all the time. Is just kind of be all right. And I think the ebb and flows of that is, the good with the bad. That's, one thing that we'll learn as we keep talking, is that there is good with the bad, there is bad with the good. There's always that. There is going to be always tough times. There's never going to be some easy boat ride that we all get to enjoy the whole way through. I think that's part of my thing where it says, life makes you uncomfortable to get you to move. I mean, life's done that to me a million times over, so I'm definitely well practiced at that. It's just took me a long, long time to get to know that that is the normal part of life, and that is the normal flow of the ebb and flows of going up and down. Definitely relationships have that as well, and any type. So it's important for sure what you were saying. I think that's just what we got to get to know is like what we're good at and how we can best deal with certain situations, and then start to practice that and kind of just find out what works for us. As like I said before, circle back around. I think that's something that, like, in any type of situation is something that you can practice to say, hey, I need 5 minutes to respond to everything you kind of said without reacting in a fight, flight, fawn, or freeze type situation of getting back with that person immediately. I think time is something that once you realize that it is there for a reason and that you can use it and benefit from just taking a moment, which, trust me, heightened moments, there's not easy just to be like, hey, need a minute, because you just want to be like, you want to come out swinging because that's just like the other person on the other end might be stringing you to a point where you just feel like you just want to explode. So it is hard to take those moments to say, hey, I'm quite pissed off right now, but I need a moment, you know what I mean? But it becomes a healthier and more best way to deal with certain situations like that. I think that's just like a good practice that you can take, because I think what we need is to not stew. And I think that's important as another practice of like how to look at situations with other people and basically get rid of the noise as you're trying to figure out the situation of what you're dealing with, where don't focus on the bad, just focus on what's really going on and like listening to what is actually being said, and then to be able to approach it without having your emotions and your system just like feeling all that. You need time to calm down. That's one thing that I've learned about myself is to be able to have the right response. It's never going to be an instant response because I run high off emotion. I'm a very emotional person. So if I give myself the time to let the emotions kind of slow down or just like subside, it helps me make decisions and how to, treat people and how they treat me back, because they start to see that I'm actually taking it serious. And that's one thing that is definitely good to have in practice, is just being able to show that you're trying, but you're also not going to react in a way that's going to keep the fire going, in the sense of to make it calmer. We can take a minute, because sometimes, a lot of the time, they don't even know, whoever you're dealing with, whatever situation, they might need a moment to let it cool down as well. So, and that's
Hmm.
just a lot of the, you know more tense situations, but it's important to know those, because those are something that happens even with people at work, other things. I think it's just a very important thing to kind of dial in and, really give yourself the respect you deserve, and the people on the other side that deserve it as well, because they need to understand that if we go off of how we feel instantly with the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, a lot of the times it's just gonna extend the negative rather than fix the positive that can be there. So
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And what I'm hearing from you too is essentially being able to sit in a scenario and expand your capacity, which, you can do bit by bit over time, but expand your capacity for that sitting in that discomfort of a scenario, a situation, to take in the information, and then if you need to take that back and take a step back and then come back when you're more level-headed. And again, like with anything else, repetition builds, like repeatedly doing that can build on how you present yourself, just like riding a bike. The more times that you get on that bike and you actually do it, the better you're going to get at it and the more comfortable you're going to get at it. The same thing with the building capacity and then having that good communication to come back and respond in a more level-headed manner so you don't respond just off the cuff. And that's, also too, that repetition is how, patterns exist over time. They form oftentimes in a very young age through what has been modeled to us. And as we take in that information from caregivers, people around us, we start to model that ourselves and to pick up those habits, those coping mechanisms, how we present ourselves in different situations. And then that becomes familiar. And that's not always the best way to go about handling things, even if you have the most well-intentioned parents that or caregivers that have modeled very well to us. It may not be the best way for us in our day-to-day interactions. But great thing is that, we can change a habit at any time. It just takes time and effort.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head there with preconceived and you know, pre-exposed to things and how we grew up and things like that. And that's definitely part of digging deep into finding out more about yourself and why you may react in certain ways. I know that for myself, having a father that, you know, would bundle things up and then just explode, that's definitely how I was used to reacting to things. And then, a mom that was just kind of trying to keep the peace a lot. And then it's crazy how much you go through life not knowing these are kind of your coping mechanisms and styles that we have as we deal with confrontation or just even interactions with different relationships. And it's wild how much those things are basically built on what you know and what you're exposed to as you're growing up. So part of figuring out why am I reacting this way, why am I feeling this way, is definitely part of learning and growing, because then you can learn and be like, okay, well, that isn't healthy and that's not helping this situation. And that's kind of where you have to go with all these things of trying to better yourself in the sense of getting to know yourself and why maybe these things are happening, or maybe, and then you could see yourself reacting in the way that you had been doing all along. But then once you start doing these healing and understanding and getting to know yourself better, you can kind of use your time wisely when we get to situations that happen like this. And it took me a long time. It's not an easy process. You have to dig deep. You have to find out, heal your inner child and all that good stuff. But there's a lot that the work matters, and the work that we do for ourselves helps our relationships around us. And that's definitely what we're trying to express here, is just being able to go into relationships with better space and mindfulness to get to have better relationships across the board by knowing ourselves, and then not trying to fix other people, not trying to make other people be better. It's more about making yourself better and fit in and hold your space while you have relationships with others, while that will create a better space for both of you, no matter who that relationship is with. Is when you know yourself better than when you did before, and how you're acting in ways that you weren't too happy with yourself later, you can kind of avoid that by getting in a good headspace, walking into knowing who you are and what will trigger you, and all these other ways of your nervous system kind of building up in different ways. And but you're able to recognize that, and then that once you realize that, then you can kind of approach things a little bit differently. And that's really what we're trying to get to let you know about, and maybe give you tips on how we deal with that. And definitely my thing is deep breaths, and you know let the information go on in the brain a little bit, and let it spin, and think about it. And try to cut back on the I'm a I can be sassy, I can be quick-witted, so I can say things right when you're done talking. My ADHD brain will come up with things before people stop talking that I want to say. But I've learned to be a little bit better, not perfect, but I've been a little bit better to hold my tongue and be able to listen to the situation, and let the air breathe, as they say. Let it breathe a little bit. So
I love sassy Bryan.
yeah, trust me, some people do and some people don't. Depends on the
Well,
relationship.
I was gonna say, if it's not targeted in a ill manner towards me, No,
all
it's all
depends
in
on.
fun.
Yeah, heck yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things like I think you're touching on there is so the great thing about different kinds of relationships is like we can recognize the patterns across different relationships oftentimes. And relationships of any kind are some of the best ways for us to be able to not only learn, but to start to adapt and adjust any habits that we have picked up that we have practiced in conditioning that we may want to change. So when people say, "Oh, I need to, I need more time to heal," I get that. But also too, it you can do that in the proper relationship too. It doesn't, but it requires two people being there in a way that provides an environment for curiosity, learning, and growth, where you communicate and you can adjust, kind of like a collaborative situation, like a collaborative group. You have to have the right kind of people in the group to actually really work well and to see, okay, how can we have the intention of coming into to the group together to collaborate and come up with the best outcome. There has to be communication and willingness to adjust. So when I say oftentimes relationships help to really help us heal, it requires that kind of a relationship. Yes, you can still gain feedback and learn a lot about yourself and be able to grow from a not so positive relationship. That's
We
called doing
learn
it the
from
hard
everything.
way.
We learn from everything, even the bad ones,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yes, yes. But yeah, but it's like, I say, for example, if I have a boss who, promotes open communication and provides me feedback as well as receives any feedback that I may give or any ideas, that is a positive two-way relationship there. The same thing in any other friendship, parental situation, romantic relationship. That is very healing. And also having just, little, micro scenarios over time too within those relationships or just out in, small interactions in the world. Those things help to not only recognize our patterns over time, but to help us practice what we want to implement moving forward.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it's important to give yourself grace, give yourself time because a lot of this stuff does take time. I've I've been on this earth many moons, and I know it's taken me a lot of moons to get to where I'm at right now, which is a lot better place than I was a couple moons ago. So these are practices that take time. Definitely give yourself grace because these aren't things like, hey, I should give myself like grace and moments to think about things and then it'll just get better. It takes time and it takes work within that relationship to get to better find yourself within those relationships of what's okay and what needs to be done in the moment. So definitely one thing I want to just reiterate is just give yourself time. Start practicing things slowly. Give yourself time to build up to be in a better spot. Don't expect you react within the fight system 90% of the time and then you get mad at yourself that you thought you could do it better this time. No, it's all about learning. It's all about, giving yourself the grace to be able to fight another day and not literally fight, but fight another day in the sense of giving yourself the time to get to a better place. And that's what it is. And there's no easy steps, there's no skipping steps. It just takes time. And then everything eventually, over time, you start to rewire yourself and rewire your own system to be able to react in the way that you're hoping to. And trust me, you're not going to do that every time. Even the most healed and most, nicest people in the world are going to have their moments. So you got to understand that, and you got to understand that you're human, we're human, and that's going to take time to not just be human about it. You got to, all these things we're just rewiring. So it takes time. And what all that really boils down to is just like if you have 10,000 hours or something. I'm not saying this is going to take 10,000 hours, but you become a professional at that point, is what they say on musicians and instruments and all that other stuff. And I'm not saying you need that much time, but you just need time It's going to take experience and time. And once you start to take your experiences that we all get every day and you start to use that for homework and studying and understanding, that's when everything starts to get better. It just takes time because you're learning every day if you want to be learning every day, and that's part of the journey that will help you as you move forward in this crazy world is learning every day and seeing opportunities and what interactions you have and kind of dissecting those on your own time and realizing maybe I could do this better, but in a positive way, not a dragging yourself for how you treated a situation. It's more or less like, hey, let me let me check the playbook. What did I do here, and who did I interact with that felt not good or it felt great? Even the good moments, you should take a look at those as well, so that you can use those as tools in other ways in other relationships. So it's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. It's a long process, but I think we covered quite a bit today. I think there was a lot there, and I think it's really good stuff. Is there anything you want to wrap it up or at least say some good things?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I kind of went off on a tangent a couple times, but one thing that, and again, we're going to dig into each of these different topics more so later down the line. But boundaries. A lot of times, folks get very confused about boundaries, and same. It's I have to regularly redefine it in my brain, but I see like the best one of the clearest examples for me to see a boundary is, I can do this. I'm available for this, but not this. It's a simple situation, a work situation. Yes, I can help with this, but I can't do the whole project necessarily, or something along those lines. It's you communicate that boundary, what you are able to do, what you're comfortable in doing. Doesn't mean putting up a wall, and it doesn't mean completely overextending yourself to take on more than you can chew or more than you're comfortable with. And I've been I've been guilty of the latter of, because I want to help a lot of the times. It's like, okay, I want to help. I want to have a harmonious relationship. And mostly, it's like, okay, at work, I want to help. Yeah, I would love to help, but time blindness is real. And you have to consider what your bandwidth is. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I can help with this, but that's all I have the capacity to do today. That's putting up a boundary. And then you aren't stuck for the rest of the day and working into the evening hours trying to do your work because you're trying to help somebody else. Does that provide pretty clear example, you think?
I think that's a great thing to touch on and a great thing to. I think we can delve super deep into this, but yeah, we'll talk about the boundary thing. I think that's great. I think what we find out about ourselves is that we bend a lot as people pleasers. I know that you are. I know that I am very much so. And boundaries are something that has like a taboo word about it because if you know a lot of the social norms around boundaries is like, oh, I set a boundary with that person and I'm not going to talk to them anymore. There's a weird taboo about boundaries, but we can have healthy boundaries, and I think that's what you're alluding to, and I think that's important to say out loud as well, is because as I've said, like as we get to know ourselves, we can know what our limits are and our boundaries is a good way to put it. And we can give ourselves, but we can't give all of ourselves. And a lot of people tend to do that. And once we start to narrow down what we can give out and take in, those boundaries are important. And that's when you can study your playbook, like I said, figure out how you're dealing with situations, how you're dealing with interactions with people and relationships. And then you go from there in the sense of, okay, I see myself overexerting and I should probably put up a boundary where I'm not going to be able to go 75-25 in this situation. Like you said at work, that's a beautiful thing. It's like, group projects are a group project. It should be four people. If it's a four people group project, it's 25 each. Usually I'm the one that'll go 50 and let other people go 15% and all that other stuff and whatever sweet math that is. But, always over exerting yourself, but there's got to be a comfortable boundary that we can set for ourselves and the people around us to say, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it more healthy. So I'm not getting out of this relationship exhausted, more feeling like I'm being acknowledged, seen, and it doesn't always have to be like what we said, where it's a boundary. there's a lot of taboo around it where it's just like when I mean, especially within spouse relationships, I put up boundaries and it's this hard line and stuff like that, which you can do that if that's healthy, but I really feel like boundaries are more a guide. They shouldn't be a hard out, hard in, because we're human. We're going to bend. We're not going to just stay the course, and there's no reason to get upset with ourselves when the boundaries get pushed or pulled. But we have to understand how much we can take, and that's where boundaries really come into play. So you give yourself a good balance of what you need to have, and I think that's what a boundary should be, is something that this is what I'm shooting for, this is what I should be treated as, or I should be treating them as, and then a boundary should be met. And there is going to be some gray areas in that. And I think that's where the taboo I don't really like on hard boundaries. I think everybody's human and you got to let people be human, but it's understanding, what we need to be better humans, I guess, is a good way. But boundaries are definitely very important when we talk about mental health and things like that. But I definitely want to reiterate that we need to make sure that they're good for everybody and not just ourselves. I think being human to other people and giving them the benefit of the doubt in a lot of these boundaries is going to help everybody around you, including the relationships that you'll have from work, spouse to friendships. You're going to
Yeah.
have that. You deal with your battery. When your battery is going to be low, that boundary might be pushed and pulled, and you're going to react in different ways. So, definitely, it's just a good marker, a good guideline of this is generally what I look for. This is generally what I need. And in any type of relationship, it's kind of good to have. So,
Yeah, that's beautifully put. Like, boundary is to bring harmony to the situation, whereas, you know, otherwise, if you, sometimes what people call a boundary is just a wall, and that just brings avoidance and
yep,
disharmony,
100%.
discord. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to like digging more into each of these topics. But yeah, we can close it up here if you'd like, and I have a final thought. Do you have any final thoughts to add?
Yeah, I think as we talked about today, just in how we're feeling and how we're reacting to certain situations, and kind of reiterating the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze and reactions, is my big thing to anybody and to everybody, including you, including myself, because I got to say it to hear it, is just give yourself grace. None of this stuff changes overnight. And I know it seems taxing to challenge situations and relationships and, start to give yourself a better holding ground, I would say, in relationships is very important. And you'll find your benefits to be very genuine and very pleasing, and to give your battery more life throughout your days when you're able to have a better understanding of how you can react and all these other skills that come with just learning about yourself and why you react in certain ways, and be able to come at situations and relationships better. Give yourself grace, let yourself fail. We all fail. We all do things that we're not proud of, and we continue on, and that's why we get better, is because we go through things and be able to take experiences and learn from them. And like I said, study your study books, study your interactions, good and bad ones, see where the good ones went good, the bad ones went bad, and the ones that are just like you wave at somebody and they wave back, that's still an interaction you could investigate and be like, that went good, don't know that person, but I waved at them, they waved back, that's a good thing. And take that and understand that that's all we really need to do, is just like really understanding is one of the biggest keys that we can take away, is knowledge about our surroundings. Because if we just are play ignorant or put up hard boundaries, like you said, like hard walls, we don't get to learn about why they may be reacting and why you're reacting to that. And when we don't try to learn, we don't get to grow. And that's really how this is. As much as I thought I got out of school a long time ago, that's why we do this podcast. I have never life is not getting out of school. It's to, take the tools of learning and growing and studying, and it's not something you got to do all the time. This is just something that if you take time to do it, it helps you play this game that is life. So that will be my good final thoughts on just my big thing is to give yourself grace. I didn't get here in an overnight thing. This took years of therapy, studying, finding out, the best ways about how I react and why I react, and definitely find out where I find the center. And, just being here now is something that I always will live by and definitely die by, is just being here now and trying to be more in the moment. And that's definitely where I practice a lot of this stuff, and where I found a lot of peace is just being able to realize if I'm taking things a little too seriously, I need to step back, give myself grace, see what's really important right now. And that's what I would give advice to anybody that has similar feelings, because we all act out of pocket. We've all acted out of pocket. We're not proud of it. But I've learned from so much of that stuff by really analyzing that stuff. So I look forward to get into more boundaries and all these other things that definitely, as we delve deeper in, we could probably talk about the whole time about one thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like I guess my closing remarks would be like sometimes what feels like safety is actually familiarity. And with awareness through observation and awareness and then practice, we can learn to create a new sense of safety that works for us and allows for even greater choice, greater connection and authenticity, because really that's what we want out of life, is to feel, like you said, seen, heard, understood, connected to ourselves, connected to others, and taking the time to notice these different things, and jotting down helps to see the patterns. It helps
Journaling,
me.
definitely.
Yeah, so that really helps, and that is the first step, and we can work to build what we want from there. Next episode we're going to talk about insight versus integration. So taking what we learn and actually implementing a lot of it into our day-to-day lives. And we've touched on bits and pieces of that in each topic that we've covered, but we're going to focus more so on that integration, insight versus integration next time.
Yeah,
So
I can't wait. That's something I was just touching on there, and I can't wait to delve a little bit deeper, kind of give my insights on how I've helped myself in that way. And I'll tell you, it helps. It helps a lot. But for Mental Health Mondays, I've been Bryon, and that is the lovely Anna, and we will see you next time.
thank you. Take care.